ministry's interest in private sector investments and spending. We are here at Indaba because we think it has the potential to be sort of the World Economic Forum of Agriculture for Africa. And so it's important for us to connect with the right investors, with the right policymakers in Africa. And as a representative of the federal government, we're not necessarily looking for individual matchmaking for ourselves, but we're facilitating a lot of the matchmaking with our companies. And so far we have seen very, very high interest, and we've also been able to meet with some of the right people to have a similar event in Nigeria next year. We already have a date in March settled, so we're looking towards the end of March, and we're just going to incorporate the Indaba team into it so that we can get the sort of quality participation that we see around here. We think it's very important to have quality and not quantity, especially for the agriculture story today in Africa. So Nigeria used to work with Grow Africa to secure what we called expressions of interest for private sector participation. This also is very useful in getting a scope and estimate of the size of investments to come. We currently have over $6.5 billion pledged investments from this forum, and we're looking to have a more recent conference to revalidate these expressions of interest and to also secure new letters of intent. The agriculture sector in Nigeria is growing tremendously. It's currently leading non-oil exports this year. First quarter of this year, we saw over $290 million exported from agriculture alone, and this is a huge positive for Nigeria in today's story. So we're looking for all private sector participants to get involved in working with the country's current policy, which is extremely focused on promoting agriculture as the revolution for Africa and Nigeria. And so today, the main products that Nigeria exports out of the $290 million I mentioned in quarter one would be cashew nuts, sesame seed, oil palm, groundnuts, shea butter. Import substitution is a very, very important policy for us right now. The country previously spent over the last 3 decades $5 million a day importing rice. Today we have decided to fight that problem by introducing what we call the Anchor Borrow program for rice. And in March next year, IFAD and the UN predicts that Nigeria will be self-sufficient in rice simply by providing access to finance to the producers of rice who needed this financing. And so this has encouraged us tremendously to apply the same approach to other value chains. So the import substitution policy, in our opinion, is going on very well in the grains, but we need to move this across to the staples and to some of our export products. Access to finance remains a huge constraint in Nigeria and across Africa. We have a Bank of Agriculture which has been redundant over the last 3 decades as well, and so we've started a restructuring program where we have bankers for the first time in charge of the bank. It seems a very obvious thing to do, but historically we've had politicians occupy these positions. This is a great first step in restructuring the Bank of Agriculture. We've also tried to institutionalize other mechanisms which we feel aid access to finance. And so we've set up a central bank-owned company called NERSAL, whose primary role is to de-risk agri-lending to the banks. NERSAL provides a 75% to 90% guarantee to the commercial banks to encourage them to lend. And we financed this company, NERSAL, with $500 million from the central bank. And so there are significant resources being put in what we call a private sector-led public approach to agriculture financing. We have a very good relationship with multilateral institutions such as the World Bank, African Development Bank, IFAD. We constantly work with them to redesign programs that are suitable and are needed by a country, Nigeria. What we've also seen in the past is where you have huge resources dedicated programs that may not necessarily have been needed by the country. And so you come in mid-budget cycle and it's a bit difficult to restructure these things. But fortunately the tide is changing. We see these institutions also being very willing to finance programs that the country itself sees as important, especially when they see the strong political will behind the diversification policies. And so we have very important programs coming up with the World Bank next year that would focus on mechanization. And we also have programs with the African Development Bank in negotiation right now to focus on youth involvement in agriculture.
you.